Hola, Andrea, bienvenida. Ya damos inicio, por favor. 3, 2, 1.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you are doing fine this morning, wherever you are. You are maybe in Mexico or in other countries. I am based in Colombia. So, Marisol, thank you very much for this warm welcome. I will introduce myself first. My name is Andrea Mejia. I'm from Colombia, and I'm the CKO of a company in Colombia named Circulatam, specialized in circular economy. Today, before we start with Ambrogio, our international guest today, I want to thank Jorge Calderas and the entire team of Estrategia Circular MX, and of course, Carola Maya from Santiago's Law for this interesting and very enrichment several sessions, because it's not only today that we are with Ambrogio, but it has been quite a journey for the last few weeks talking about EPR and its importance, not only for Mexico, but for the whole region. So today we are based in two parts. Some of you are at the auditorium of the Prepa Tech Student Center at Tecnológico de Monterrey, and others we are all virtually connected. So that is the amazing thing of technology, that we can all share this moment with Ambrogio independently where we are based. So before we begin, we have a simultaneously translation. Um, so you can, if you go to the low part of your Zoom, you will have, I think it's on the three dots, you will find the translation. So you can, if you don't speak English, or if we speak too, now I remember that I'm speaking too fast. So it's a good reminder for me to speak a little bit slowly, so that our translator can translate it better for you. So don't hesitate to go on the dots and to be able to get the translation we have for you today. So as you may know, we are at this FORO REP México 2026, which, as I said before, and I said a few weeks ago when I was moderating the rep for textiles, I think we should understand that even if it's organized by this amazing team from Mexico, this session should not only um, teach us for Mexico, but for all the region, because all in Latin America, I think almost all of our countries are talking right now about the importance of EPR. Some are more advanced, some are a bit delayed. We in Colombia have already EPR for technical things like computers and for plastics, but for example, we don't have a PR for textiles. So I think it has been very interesting to be able to know what other countries in the region are doing. But now it's going to be very interesting to hear from Ambrogio, who is Italian, worked for the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is based in the UK, but he lives in Belgium. So I think it's very interesting because and now it's talking to us in Latin America. So it's a little bit, and I think it's very nice to see how international we are, and to learn from Ambrogio, who knows so much about EPR, who has been not only at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, where he leads the foundation policy workstream and co-leads the Business Coalition for a Global Plastic Treaty. I mean, he has been negotiating with governments. He has been specializing exactly on the extent producer responsibility, knows a lot about the importance of eco-design. We have to remember that without eco-design, EPR will only function halfway. I always emphasize of the importance of eco-design or circular design. We tend to forget it in sometimes in our countries. So he has a background in engineering and extensive experience across corporate and NGO sectors. So I think we will learn a lot from Ambrogio today about the importance of policy and EPR for our countries. And I will just say one thing that we talk about in during the EPR for Texas, and we have to remember is not about copy paste. We have to learn what has been working for other countries. We have to learn what didn't work and to adapt it to our own countries, because we all have different infrastructure, different culture, different methodologies, but it's good to know how they have implemented it to learn how to do it ourselves. So, Ambrogio, I'm really happy to say hello and welcome to our beautiful region in Latin America, even if you're sitting right now in Belgium. I hope you have a sunny day like I have here in Medellin, where it's 10 a.m. and we have already this sun shining, which is very beautiful. And Ambrogio, the stage is yours.
Muchas gracias, Andrea. We also have the sun here in Brussels today, which is very rare and unique, so it's not like Colombia. But antes de comenzar, quería decir dos o tres palabras en español porque creo que es importante para todo. Y también quería decir que tenemos un equipo basado en Brasil, tenemos un equipo en Latinoamérica. También yo estoy aquí en Bruselas, en Bélgica. Pero tenemos mucha gente en Latinoamérica. Quería decir dos o tres palabras en español porque para mí es muy importante presentar, tener la posibilidad de presentar a ustedes sobre un tema siempre importante como la ley REP, y también porque quería reconocer la ley de economía circular que fue adoptada algunos meses antes en México. Es muy importante porque la ley no solo reconoce la necesidad de resolver el problema de la contaminación con una mejor gestión de residuos, pero esta ley va mucho más allá y reconoce la importancia de otras etapas en mesuras en el ciclo de vida de un producto que se necesitan para resolver en verdad el problema de residuos y de la contaminación. Y eso, como tú has dicho, Andrea, es la fase del diseño del producto. Y para mí y para la Fundación Ellen MacArthur, reconocer la importancia del diseño del producto y la necesidad de un enfoque sistémico y coherente es fundamental. Es la cosa número uno para una transición que aspira a una economía circular. Entonces, no puedo hacer todas las presentaciones en español, necesito 2-3 más años para practicar en español, entonces voy a hablar en inglés, pero era importante decir 2 o 3 palabras en español. So, switching to English, and thankfully we have the interpreter with us, so I can do the presentation in English. But I have prepared a couple of slides for you that I would like to walk you through. So bear with me. Can you just give me a thumb up, Andrea, if you can see the screen? Great, perfect. So as you have seen, the title of the presentation is EPR, a necessary part of the circular economy. And I will walk you through why and what is the rationale behind it. And as you said before, we do need a comprehensive policy approach that looks at different things. And at the foundation, we have established a comprehensive framework, which we call the Universal Circular Economy Policy Goals, that look really at different measures that must be taken into consideration from policymakers when designing a circular economy infrastructure and policy infrastructure. And these goals go from stimulating the design for the circular economy. It goes to managing resources to preserve the value, but also looks at making the economics work. One question that often comes up is that making the economics work, economics don't work for a circular economy. And I agree with you. So we need to make the economics work. And there are several reasons for it. But we also need to invest in innovation, infrastructure, in skills, and we need to collaborate for a system change. So as you see, all of these goals are connected with each other. And EPR really is a fundamental tool to connect all of these dots. EPR is a fundamental tool in accelerating the transition towards a circular economy. And it's an imperative, and that's what we work on at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, that we work on shared languages and we work on a common understanding in order to create a common direction of travel. What is EPR? Andrea, you already mentioned that EPR applies to other sectors, and that's true. We have extensive discussions on textiles. We have extensive discussions on waste and electronics. But here today, my focus is on packaging and looking at the learnings from packaging EPR. And when I talk about EPR, I talk about a specific policy instrument, which is the fee-based EPR, mandatory fee-based EPR, which is a specific instrument to implement the polluter pays principle. And so in today's conversation, so in the scope of today, of course, we can talk about EPR in many different ways, but I thought it was important to give focus to the conversation. And I'm going to talk about mandatory fee-based extended producer responsibility schemes. And these schemes are a performance-based regulation where outcomes, objectives, roles and responsibilities, the scope are really set and defined by law. And in these EPR schemes, the law requires companies to be responsible for and provide funding dedicated to the after-use management. That means collection and processing of the products that they place on the market. Often people mention deposit refund systems, and these systems can either work alongside fee-based mandatory EPR or they can be embedded. So they're not separate things, they're not different worlds. It's just about how we integrate EPR and DRS. But the most important point for me is the last one, that the revenues generated in these schemes are based on the underlying principle of the net cost. And I will say more in the coming slides. As I said, the underlying problem is that the process nowadays, the process of collection, sorting, and recycling comes at a net cost. So the circulation of packaging, the circulation of products, the circulation of materials involves collection, the sorting, and the recycling processes. And all of this process comes at a net cost. It means that it costs more to do all of these steps than the value of the final product. So there is a gap. And this is why nowadays all over the world, in different ways, but waste management is not 100% efficient. That's why we have leakage in the environment, and that's why material circulation doesn't reach 100%. Well, 100% maybe is too difficult to achieve in any scenario, but anyway, the recycling rate are still low and still stagnant, because the problem is, and I will never stress it enough, that all of this process comes at a net cost, a negative cost. And to cover for this net cost, wherever we are in the world, we do need some policy intervention, because we need dedicated, ongoing, and sufficient funding to cover for this negative cost, to cover for the gap, to cover for the net cost. And without this type of funding, so without dedicated, ongoing, and sufficient funding, it is very much unlikely that packaging, collection, sorting, recycling will scale to the extent required. And to be more specific by what I mean by dedicated, ongoing, and sufficient, by dedicated, I mean that funding should be ring-fenced, so should stay in the system to ensure that the fees collected are dedicated to a clearly defined scope of activities. And that's the beauty of EPR, that the money collected is dedicated. And the second aspect of ongoing is that funding should be guaranteed on an ongoing basis as opposed to a one-off investment. So it needs to run. Like, we need to have the certainty of EPR funding over the years, not just one day, 1 year, limited in time. And sufficient, of course, because we need money to be sufficient to achieve the targets, to achieve and to execute the defined scope of the activities that we want to implement. And this money should evolve in line with the actual net cost. So if the cost of the process and the price of the final material change, of course, the fees should change and evolve accordingly. Now, you may wonder why I'm saying here that EPR is the only proven way to provide dedicated, ongoing, and sufficient funding. And this table summarizes a little bit why. Why is that the case? Because what are the other options? What are the other solutions that have been tested across the world and that have proven not to be able to guarantee dedicated, ongoing, and sufficient funding? If we look at public funding, basically public budget. So public budget can be provided on an ongoing basis, but partially if you want, because taxes can be, like, tax allocation can change year by year, but it's not dedicated for sure, because a public budget is a big bag of money that governments decide how to allocate, and traditionally has really proven not to be sufficient. So we have evidence for this, that public budget is not enough to guarantee proper waste management services and processes. We also have seen a lot of voluntary mechanism around the world in the past years. And if we can say that voluntary funding and voluntary PR is dedicated because voluntary companies provide money for this, it's not provided on an ongoing basis because companies can stop the funding whenever they want. And it's not sufficient. It has proven to not be sufficient to really scale the process as much as we need. And that's why I'm saying that EPR is the only proven way to secure dedicated, ongoing, and sufficient funding to fix this recycling economics and cover for the negative cost. At the same time, I think it's unfair to talk about EPR just as a funding mechanism. There are many more benefits that goes beyond providing money. And we can talk about upstream incentives. That means incentivizing solutions that avoid the generation of waste in the first place, like reuse and refill model, just to mention one example. We have seen that the adoption of EPR really make the systems much more efficient and is a gain for both the public sector and the private sector. And we have seen that EPR increase awareness of the final consumer, so of us as people, as users of the products. And most importantly, something that I will never stress enough is that via EPR schemes, we increase the transparency of our system. We have more data, and by having more data, we can make better decision and more informed decision. This slide summarizes a little bit our fundings when we compare systems with no EPR, systems with limited EPR, or system with mandatory EPR. And you see that the performance on average is way better wherever we have mandatory EPR schemes when it comes to collection for recycling rates. So of course, this is the easy part of the story, but it's not that straightforward. Like, EPR is a concept. EPR, as I said, is established and there is evidence that it works. But if it is one concept, it also means that it comes with several ways of implementation, and not always these different types of implementation lead to more system efficiency. There is a high degree of flexibility in EPR governance. I have my personal opinion, but I don't want to debate on my personal opinion on EPR schemes today. But the best setup can be debated extensively. And we can look at many different things, like we can look at EPR systems with a single system or competing system. We can look at industry-led or government-led. We can look at system where the operational responsibility sits with EPR, within the EPR, or the operational responsibility sits with municipality, we have seen PROs, so the Packaging Recovery Producer Responsibility Organization, created by material type, plastic, glass, paper, or we have seen PROs based on category types, so household packaging or commercial packaging. And then we have also seen PEPRs systems covering the full cost approach or the share cost approach. And then, as I mentioned before, EPR and DRS, what is the relationship between those? So again, I don't think that the scope for today is to discuss the best setup in a specific country, but there are a few considerations that must be kept in mind. And these considerations are, for me, quite simple. And the first one is that we really need to keep the focus on creating transparency and data availability. The money we collect must be ring-fenced. We need to define the scope of covered packaging, types, and materials. And we very well need to specify objectives and the scope of the funding activities. So what is covered by EPR? And then, very importantly, as I said, EPR is performance-driven. So we need to define the targets, and the targets need to determine the cost. And of course, within the system, we need to define the roles and responsibilities of the main stakeholders. And last but not least, we need to have robust reporting, monitoring, and enforcement mechanisms. I have a couple of more slides that goes more into the details. So I don't want you to focus on the details, but on the message. And the message of this slide that is very convoluted, you can see a lot of things, but what I want to share with you is that when we talk about the implementation of regulatory measures to address waste and pollution, EPR can play a significant role. So the graphs here are only related to plastic and are related to the implementation of the global treaty that is currently under negotiations. And you see in the red box that the estimate says that the public cost to manage the measures in place is going to be $1.5 trillion in the next 15 years. And we have calculated that EPR can provide 0.6 trillion. So it's almost 50% of the public budget can be covered by EPR. So the main message here is that we can really alleviate pressure on public budget, and at the same time, we can make systems much more efficient for the industry. I'm close to the conclusion, but I know that up until now, I never mentioned the informal sector and waste pickers. And waste pickers play a key role all over the world, not just in global south and emerging economies, but all over the world. And the informal waste pickers are responsible for 30 to 80% of waste management in cities. And globally, they are responsible for around 60% of the plastic collected for recycling globally. These are huge numbers, and this is a huge contribution of the informal sector, yet often they are very much unrecognized and they are underpaid. So their involvement is not only a social imperative, from my personal opinion, but it's a strategic opportunity to make EPR schemes work. So we need to work with existing systems if we want the EPR system to deliver. So let me conclude by saying that EPR is a necessary part of the circular economy. In the first place, for a circular economy, it's very important to fund collection and recycling infrastructure, incentivize circular design, and increase materials and product circulation. For government, EPR is key because it reduces pressure on public budget, it provides enforcement levers, and it supports national waste and climate targets. For businesses, this is the most effective way to cover the net cost of recycling. The other options are taxes, but I never heard a business being happy to pay taxes. It will level the playing field, and it will de-risk investments and support compliance. And for the society as a whole, EPR really can provide the support needed for cleaner environments and healthier communities. So I will stop here, Andrea, and I will hand over back to you. But a huge thank you once again for inviting me today. It was really a pleasure, and I hope that I provided some context to why EPR is a key policy tool in the circular economy transition.
Thank you very, very much for your insights. And as you wrote in the chat, I will said Ambro and not the full name. So
it's okay.
Ambro, thank you very much. We have short time, so I will make only 2 questions for right now. So the first question for you, Ambro, is from Jonathan Mendez Perez. He's a sales manager at Ecolomóvil Mexico. And he asked, considering that in emerging markets like Mexico, thousands of authorized waste companies operate independently in collecting and sorting, how do you recommend the future regulation integrates these waste managers with EPR schemes to ensure real traceability, avoiding a scenario where EPR limits itself to mere paper reporting obligations for manufacturers?
Thanks, Andrea. So if I understand correctly, the question is how, and if I try to paraphrase the question, is really how do we ensure that in the context of Mexico, where we already have tons of operators, waste management companies that operate independently, how do we make sure that EPR doesn't become an extra burden to them running economic activities? Well, as I said, a couple of considerations. As I said in the presentation, any EPR scheme must work with the existing system. So if the current situation in Mexico is that there are so many waste operators, that needs to be taken into consideration. I have my personal opinion that it is much better to operate with a one single not-for-profit producer responsibility organization at the country level, because I think that it's better for transparency, is better for ensuring traceability. So that would be my first part of the answer to a very complicated question. So to have one PRO, and then all of those existing operators must be able to sign contracts with the PRO. And if those companies are already authorized companies, they should be able to sign a contract with the PRO when it comes about operational implementation of EPR. So again, as I said, the PRO and the EPR scheme must work together with the existing system and not work against. There is another point that I want to mention on avoiding mere paper reporting obligations. I think it's important for the EPR to know that transparency means data and data means effectiveness. And so we need to ensure that there is a smooth process in place to gather those data that doesn't apply an extra burden on the individual companies. I would love to pick up in a more detailed conversation, but I think I need to stop here in the interest of time.
Thank you very much. And we have a second question from Hugo Olazaran from Black Mass Material, and he asks, the circular economy discussion has historically focused on packaging. As electrification accelerates, do you believe critical materials and EV batteries will become one of the most strategically important EPR streams? And what lessons should emerging markets like Mexico adopt today to avoid repeating the mistakes Europe had to correct later?
I wish I could tell you exactly how to overcome the problems that Europe is facing, but there are a lot of learnings definitely from Europe that we can take. And the first learning is the general direction. I think one of the important things in Europe was this ability to set a direction, to set a vision. And here we are still trying to understand how to translate that vision into an effective system. But on your point, Hugo, if I remember the name correctly, we have a lot of examples also on waste and electric equipments. We have EPR applied to mattresses. We have EPR applied to textile, which is emerging. We have EPR applied to tires. So we already have a lot of examples outside of the packaging sphere. And in many discussions that I was having, one of the key learnings is that the success of EPR schemes stays in providing the dedicated, ongoing, and sufficient funding. So going back to my presentation, that's the learning. If the EPR scheme is really focused on a set scope of activities, that's really the triggering factor for the success of EPR. And you mentioned an increased electrification and more electric vehicles, for example, more battery to store renewable energy. Definitely, that's a market that we need to explore. And I know that there already are discussions on EPR for these sectors. And it's really important that we focus also on these sectors, on making sure that in the law, there are very well-defined scope, objectives, and roles and responsibilities, and defined targets, so that we are able to quantify the net cost that the EPR scheme needs to cover. In an ideal scenario, and in many sectors, there is no need for EPR. Like if recycling batteries actually is profitable, there is no need for EPR. The problem is that I haven't seen a sector right now where it is profitable in the current political and economic conditions to really circulate everything. And we can talk about the externalization of the environmental impact. We can talk about many things, incentives, the application of value-added tax. So that's when I say EPR needs to see it in a broader context of a policy framework, is because right now circular economy models are not exactly working because the economic model is not set up for circular solution. It's set up for linear solutions. And so EPR is going to bring a part of the solution, but we need to look past beyond that.
Ambrogio, thank you very much. I will just, before we finish, I want to make 3 points you said during your presentation. And one is the importance of eco-design from a systemic point of view. Yeah, that's something we are missing in our region. Then the importance of EPR is not only a funding tool, but it's will increase transparency and especially data. We are missing a lot of data in our region. We don't have sufficient data. So I think EPR will help us to get that important data to get better. And the third point is the importance of the informal sector, specifically when you say they're underpaid, not recognized. So we need to bring them into the formality in our region and make them a vital part of the EPR schemes in every country in Latin America. So thank you very much, Amber, for your time. Yes, please.
Quickly on your point, on the first point, I think Latin America is doing much better than many other regions about system thinking. So, including in the Ley de Economía Circular in Mexico, I think we need to acknowledge that. I think it would be unfair to say that your region doesn't have a system thinking. It does, but we need to do more. And that's why, as a foundation, we are really keen to work with the region, because there is much more work to do, but the basics are there. So we just need to do more.
That's fantastic news. I'm happy to close the panel with that insight. So thank you very much. Thank you for everyone who's connected here online and who's in person in Mexico. Thank you to all the team of Estrategia Circular and Instituto Slow. Ambro will pass these slides, so everyone here who just registered online, they will get, and of course in person, you will get the presentation on your email. So just be a little bit patient, but you will have it in your inbox. And we finish here, and we are opening now the Keynote conference to continue with our program. So I return to Marisol. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.